I prefer not to have a focus, certainly not one that is being defined by existing categories, because the position of the artist is a very problematic one, tied to the history of imperialism, that the world is out there for, artists to take, for museums to host and plunder and normalize the plunder. So I will not define myself as an artist. Expertise is something that was shaped as part of the colonial project, as part of the imperial project. And it gave people license to invade others' cultures, to extract knowledge from these cultures, to extract objects from these cultures. We cannot repair them without, a wholesale, repair of the world, without full decolonization of the world. I grew up in the Zionist colony in Palestine. I was assigned a settler colonial identity that I refused to recognize myself in it. And it took me years to understand how this project of the colonization of Palestine intersects with another project, with another colonial project by which I was defined, which is the French colonization of Algeria. And understanding this intersection helped me actually to arrive to the book that I wrote during a decade, Potential History, which is about the imperial projects related to the production of knowledge, to what we call museums, art, human rights. The invention of the past is a very powerful imperial construct. Unlearning it is necessary in all the different domains where we are working, either as historians or geographers or scholars of photography or even photographers, but also in relation to the accumulation of photographs that you have in different museums. And these are collections of photographs that were part of the dispossession of those people's cultures. The museum is a very tricky institution. You are invited to recognize and normalize the existence of the past. Art history, for example, is an idea that is built on plunder. I don't think that this violence is completely hidden. It's there. We were just taught not to see it, not to pay attention to it. Colonization is a very violent project, right? It's not only about invasion, extraction, dispossession. It's also about invading your mentality. It's also about colonizing your mind, forcing you to interiorize the point of view of the colonizers about you. In the last book that I wrote, Potential History, I try to understand the mechanism of the shutter. There were already a series of technologies in 1492 that were based on this idea of the shutter. What was taken could no longer be returned. What was dissociated, for example, people from their objects, this dissociation should last forever. This is the imperial project. It's a shutter. It's this very violent movement, like a guillotine that cut against the will of people, as a violent project, separates people from their objects, people from their lands, separate, partitioning. Once it operates, imperialism tells you it cannot be returned, it cannot be repaired, it cannot be restituted. Museums say, this is ours, it's not yours. This is what museums tell communities who come to claim what was taken from them. Photography is part of the world. It was used to destroy it, and it was used to try to repair it. So there is no role to photography. There is a role to our motivation or to our engagement or to our commitment not to accept violence as a fait accompli in its normalized form of existence as we encounter it in museums, in archives, in libraries that actually invite us to forget this violence. I am looking at the way that people are refusing to be kept outside of the shutter once the shutter fell down like, a guillotine. They're trying to hold it up, not to let it, be closed after them when they were expelled from their land. The photograph is about a moment that is gone, is something that I reject. So you see a Palestinian who is about to be expelled. And I know that this Palestinian, at the end of the day, was expelled. But I see him refusing. He's not going. There is a procession of Palestinians, and he is standing still, kneeling. He's not going anywhere. He refuses. To relate to this photograph as a document is a document about him as a refugee, right? This is how you will encounter him in the archive. Already a refugee, but he's not a refugee. He's refusing to become a refugee. So this refusal is constitutive to my understanding of photography, because this refusal is a refusal that we must keep alive. We cannot relate to it as over. Okay, so Palestinians lost Palestine and we moved on. The refusal to move on is the refusal of imperial temporality that invented the past, that he already belonged to the past. And those who are being born there belong to the future. Which future? Empire future. It's a refusal to look at the photograph as if it documents something that is over. We were trained to believe that we are coming after the event. And with the way that I theorize photography as in between two events of photography, we never come too late. It doesn't mean that we can change reality, but we can at least change the way that we interact with these people. Looking at the suffering of others is a problematic approach, because it implies this imperial imaginary that associates certain areas in the world with suffering and associates certain areas in the world with moral approach to these images. Like there are images of suffering, and what are we supposed to do? Who is this we? Westerners who are responsible for the destruction of parts of the world, who are now asking questions about what they can do in relation to this. It's about stopping the imperial machine, stopping racial capitalism, stopping the perpetuation of technologies of violence all over the world. You cannot, rescue photography out of the imperial project. I think that we cannot think that there is an innocent position in this game, right? This violent game. The question is, as a photographer, how you reduce the violence that you are exercising in what you are doing. Also, how do you think about what you are doing in relation to previous iterations of the same things? Do you need another photograph of a Palestinian torn body in order to understand that this is wrong? This is my strike against the archive. There are cases where I'm going on strike against the archive. I'm a single person. So you ask yourself, where is the strike? There are strikes that we can, lead alone, because we are persuaded that what we are being asked to do is wrong. To ask me to show another image of torn Palestinian body in order to convince you that this settler colonial project is wrong means that we have now to cater you rather than to continue the struggle. Why do the Palestinian need to give you another moment of himself or herself in order to persuade you in the obvious? In the civil contract of photography, my motivation was to decenter the position of the photographer. What I try to say is a simple thing. The photographed person is there. The photographed person engages with photography, sometimes no less than the photographer, and sometimes even more. So what I try to do is to undo or unlearn histories and theories of photography that forget the event of photography where these photographs were taken. During the first decades of the colonization of Palestine, cameras were confiscated. Only Zionist photographers were allowed to take photographs. You have the elimination of indigenous photographers. The photographer that is being allowed to take photographs when others are not being allowed to take photographs is already inhabiting an imperial position. The history of photography is built on centuries of violence. What do we do in relation to situations where we see clearly that there was not only not consent, but there was, sheer violence in order to obtain images? I sometimes really don't envy anyone who has to hold their camera in situations that are situations of violence. I'm not saying that they don't have to take photograph. I'm not saying that they have to, but I don't envy them. So what I try to do is to refuse what is there that should be refused. What I'm trying to do is to eliminate what is there that was not eliminated earlier. What I'm trying to do is to juxtapose them with what was eliminated from the frame and should have been there. So what I'm trying to do is to disrespect the frame. And when I'm saying disrespect, it's not that I disrespect photographers. I respect the labor of everybody. But the photograph is not only the property of the photographer. And if there is a photograph that I think that should have not been taken that way, or that should not exist that way without being juxtaposed with another image, the photographer is not the last word about what will be the aftermath of this or that photograph. Photography was institutionalized as something that belonged to the photographers, belonged to those who commission photographs, and belonged to those who acquired these photographs and fortified these kind of mega archives that we see in the West of images of people who never saw these images or are living, elsewhere. And their cultures were invaded, including through photography. It's this respect of the institutionalization of photography as a private property of those who own the means to keep these photographs as theirs. Today, every image that you look from everywhere in the world is the property of those violent image corporations, even though they have no rights to own this. They own pieces of our shared history as if it was theirs. Photographers are the middle persons. They allegedly own the images, but they don't really own them. But it's not that they are the big, sharks of racial capitalism. Actually, photographers can go on strike. They can go on strike and say, yeah, historically, we were given with the rights for something that doesn't belong only to us. It is shared property. So they can go on strike and expropriate the mega corporations or expropriate the archives from what they hold against other people and say it was recognized as ours, so we claim it now in order to share it, to renegotiate the privileges that they received and to share them with those from whom they were taken. Millions, zillions of photographs that are claimed to be owned by archives, libraries, museums, newspapers, how they can be redistributed. This idea that you can speak for others in those Western media is a very problematic approach to those conflict zones. Maybe you can speak without taking their images. Maybe you can speak with them because they have voice. The fact that they didn't succeed in stopping the violence against them doesn't mean that they were voiceless. We cannot think that violence is something that we discover for others. We have to change the way that we relate to photography. So no, photography will not be the rescuer of the world. There is no rescuer for the world.